Welcome back. New Zealand has become the first country to turn coronavirus free, with no new cases reported and no active cases. Meanwhile, in Brazil, 1,382 more people died from COVID-19 as the death toll crossed 37,000. The US has recorded 722 deaths overnight, taking the tally to over 110,000. The global death toll from the coronavirus has exceeded 402,000, with confirmed cases over 7 million. More in this report.
When the world is struggling to contain the COVID-19 pandemic, New Zealand has become virus-free. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced to lift the country's remaining virus restrictions at midnight. Meanwhile, Americas are still the hardest hit region of the world, with death tolls jumping every day. But the New York state is set to emerge from its long coronavirus lockdown today. In the UK, Health Minister Matt Hancock says the anti-racism protests attended by the thousands of people are increasing the risk of virus spread.
The virus itself doesn't discriminate, and gathering in large groups is temporarily against the rules precisely because it increases the risk of the spread of this virus. So I would urge people to make their argument, and I will support you in making that argument, but please don't spread this virus, which has already done so much damage and which we're starting to get under control.
Elsewhere in Asia, restrictions are also being relaxed in Indonesia and India. China says it will further strengthen the country's public health system to enhance its capacity of response to public health emergencies.
First, we will further improve the input mechanism for public health, improve the basic conditions for disease prevention and control, and further strengthen and improve public health services. Second, we will have a more specific mandate for the functions of disease control centers at different levels.
In South Korea, new cases have slowed, but concerns remain over a second wave of the outbreak as the country enters its final phase of reopening schools.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has warned that COVID-19 cases may hit their peak in the country in late July or early August. Addressing a press briefing, Khan said the situation may get worse if precautionary measures are not adopted. Khan went on to say that the lockdown can only slow down the virus spread. The Prime Minister said his government's priority is to flatten the curve by implementing SOPs. Pakistan has reported 2,067 deaths among over 103,000 cases of infection so far. In their fresh act of state terrorism, Indian troops have martyred 4 more Kashmiris in Shopian district. This takes the death toll to 9 in the past 24 hours. The occupying forces killed the civilians in a cordon and search operation in Bijura area of the district. 5 youth were martyred by the troops in the same area yesterday. The authorities also suspended all mobile internet services in the district during the operation. Islamabad has strongly rejected the allegations by Indian Ministry of External Affairs, calling Pakistan a nerve center of terrorism. The Foreign Office said Delhi's statement completely distorts facts to advance its false and self-serving narrative. FA spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said the remarks of Prime Minister Imran Khan have been completely twisted by Anurag Srivastav. She said Delhi's statement is a continuation of their desperate campaign to divert international attention from India's state terrorism and IOK. Farooqi said Pakistan has been the principal victim of terrorism, including militancy from across the border. He said that Indian policy to destabilize parts of Pakistan and using terrorism against its neighbors is well known. Farooqi said Pakistan's role as a facilitator to the ongoing peace process in Afghanistan has been widely acknowledged. The Taliban have met US Special Envoy for Afghanistan Zalmi Khalilzad and NATO Forces Commander General Austin Scott Miller in Doha. The group spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said their leader Mullah Baradar Khund discussed the prisoners' release and intra-Afghan talks. Shaheen said the Qatari delegation led by Mutlaq al-Qahtani also participated. Earlier, Khalilzad called on Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa. The two spoke of matters relating to national security, Afghan refugees and border security. Khalilzad is visiting Doha, Islamabad and Kabul as part of efforts to bring peace in Afghanistan. Protests sparked by the custodial killing of African-American George Floyd have spread globally, in addition to all 50 U.S. states. Battered with increasing calls to deliver justice, the Minneapolis City Council has pledged to dismantle the local police department. Council President Lisa Bender says the body aims to come up with a new community-led model of public safety. Further details in this report.
Protesters have taken to the streets across the world as demonstrations against police brutality and racism entered their 13th day. In the US, one of the largest protests was held in Los Angeles, where an estimated 20,000 people packed the Hollywood Boulevard. In New York, at least half a dozen loosely organized groups of protesters marched through the city.
Black Lives Matter, yes, we out here supporting all lives matter, but Black Lives Matter too.
In New York, at least half a dozen loosely organized groups of protesters marched through the city, chanting slogans to defund the police. European cities have also witnessed mass gatherings. In Brussels, thousands marched against systemic prejudice and incidents of looting luxury stores were reported. In the UK, the statue of a 17th century slave trader in Bristol was thrown into the harbour on the second day of protests.
Well, I think first of all, when it came to what happened yesterday in London on Whitehall with the protesters, I'm absolutely sickened and appalled by the level of violence that was on display. Police officers were abused and police officers were injured, and we have a police officer that is seriously injured and in hospital right now, and that is absolutely unacceptable.
But the British Interior Minister called on the protests to be stopped following violent clashes in London. Meanwhile, in Madrid, some 3,000 protesters observed a minute's silence for Floyd and other victims of police brutality and institutional racism.
Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow backs Egypt's peace plan for Libya and it must be the main forum to decide the future of the country. The new plan proposes an elected leadership council in Libya and a ceasefire starting on Monday. Calling proposals put forward by Cairo as comprehensive, Moscow said they could serve long overdue negotiations between the opposing sides in Libya. This comes as government troops and forces led by Khalifa Haftar are engaged in fierce fighting for the strategic city of Sirte. The Haftar forces have suffered a string of military setbacks over the past week. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will not approve the establishment of a Palestinian state as part of the annexation plan. In an interview, Netanyahu said the plan for West Bank will be implemented within a few weeks. Netanyahu said the mapping process for annexation has not been completed yet. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Hamas movement has warned that Israel's takeover will spark a massive uprising. In a statement, Hamas said no power can change Jerusalem's position from being the Palestinian city and capital. Israel is expected to annex parts of the occupied West Bank, Jordan Valley and East Jerusalem from July 1st. France says it does not want to see Russia drifting away from Europe, as maintaining dialogue is in the bloc's interest. In an interview, Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said France, however, condemns Russia's interference in Ukraine and Middle East. Le Drian said diplomatic relations must be upheld despite the gaps in positions on a number of international conflicts. Drian said France works with its allies to bring them closer to Europe and push towards multilateralism. The foreign minister said the world is no longer divided between two blocs like it was in the late 1940s. He said there is a possibility for dialogue and international cooperation in common interests such as health and collective security. We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has lauded Russia, China, Iran and Cuba for their support, saying they are real friends of the country. In a televised speech, Maduro said these four countries have always provided help to Caracas and more humanitarian aid is coming. The president said the U.S. offered $20 million worth of assistance, but not a single dollar came through. The political crisis in Venezuela exacerbated in 2019 when opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president. Maduro blasted the move as a coup staged by Washington and said he was severing diplomatic ties with the U.S. While the US and most of EU recognize Guaido as president, Russia, Iran, Cuba and Turkey voiced support for Maduro. In the UK, new travel quarantine rules have come into effect today, requiring all people arriving in Britain to self-isolate for 14 days. According to the new rules, those arriving by plane, ferry or train must give an address where they will self-isolate. Under the rules, those arriving in England and Northern Ireland can face a fine of £1,000 if they fail to self-isolate for full 14 days. UK's Home Secretary Priti Patel said the laws were designed to prevent a second wave of coronavirus. But industries have warned they will be severely impacted by the rules. In May, aviation industry leaders urged Prime Minister Boris Johnson to avoid taking a blanket approach to quarantine. In Bangladesh, Rohingya living in the world's largest refugee camp in Cox's Bazar are not getting tested for COVID-19 due to fear of isolation. Let's find out more in this report.
The camps at Cox's Bazar are home to nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees, many of whom fled across the border to Bangladesh to escape violence in neighboring Myanmar. The densely packed refugees are at heightened risk of communicable diseases, but refugees with coronavirus symptoms are not ready to get tested despite the first deaths from the disease in the crowded settlements.
Well, the Rohingya population in general live with their family members. And there is a very strong group belonging feeling, probably, like many populations around the world. And it's true that the COVID, as MSF, we have experienced that in other infectious diseases outbreaks, such as Ebola. It's very difficult for population to accept to be taken away and to be on their own, because at the end, in most of our facilities, for any other pathology, or you would have a caretaker and one member of your family able to come with you.
A Doctors Without Borders study indicates that visits to clinics dropped by 50% in March. Some patients also have tried to escape and hide from health workers.
But it requires a very strong trust relationship between the health actors and the communities, and a very strong understanding of all the isolation procedures, which are a bit counterintuitive for some populations who have different ways of living and who really suffer from being separated from their family, for example, or feel very much stigmatized as well if they are taken away separately from the rest of the group.
29 cases have been found in the camps since mid-May, but only 339 tests have been carried out, leading experts to suspect a greater spread. Infection in Bangladesh have climbed to 57,000, including 673 other residents in Cox's Bazar's district.
In India, the textile industry is facing grave crisis as numerous mills have been shut down for more than 2 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite some relaxations, the industry has not been able to return to its normal functioning. More in this report.
The COVID-19 pandemic has created a crisis across all the businesses in all over the world, and India is no exception. Along with other businesses, textile industry has faced blow of the virus with no workers amid lockdown. Hundreds of workers have left their native villages amid the scare, while the revenues of the textile have shrunk significantly.
Industry start nahi hui.
This industry cannot start without workers, so talks are going on to call back the workers as if this industry doesn't start soon. Textile looms, mills, and all the places of work of traders will not start too. This is why this demand has been put forward that if the workers want to come to Surat, the government, should open a way for them to return.
Despite India easing lockdown, textile traders are fighting for survival. They're left with no options to recoup their lost revenue.
The business cannot run without the workers. It is incomplete without them. If they return, there can be work during the upcoming festivals and the markets will run properly, or else markets won't be able to run without workers.
According to the official figures, India has 236,657 novel coronavirus cases with 6,642 deaths so far.
Hundreds of Moscow residents rushed to an open-air book fair in Red Square despite COVID-19 restrictions in place. Organizers said they implement various measures to halt the spread of the virus, but still, many publishers opted out to stay away from the fair. Let's find out more in this report.
Weary of lockdown, Moscow's residents invigorate the Red Square. Clad in face masks and gloves, book clans have crowded to the first large gathering after the outbreak. Despite criticism, the book fair is largely seen as a small sign of gradual efforts to open the Russian capital back up amid the pandemic. Around 180 publishers displayed their stalls at the fair, which drew up to 600 visitors within hours. The fair's organizers said they have assured the required measures to safeguard people's safety. Chairs were placed 1 meter apart and people's temperatures were checked at the entrance.
We think it is very important now to provide a good mood for our readers as the life slowly returns to normal. Of course, we stick to all the safety requirements. As you can see, we all are wearing gloves and masks, all the staff. The salesperson also wear protection screens. We have sanitizers everywhere. We clean up regularly. Everything is tightly controlled.
Along with social distancing measures, officials ordered sanitation of the site and mandatory use of face masks and gloves.
We are not afraid. Of course, we stick to all the quarantine rules. The law makes us to, but we do not panic. The weight is being blown now.
The event was criticized from those who considered it an early jab toward the reopening of social events.
The self-isolation regime in Moscow has been prolonged until June 14. People need passes to leave their homes. They have schedules to go for a walk. I do not think that holding a festival at such a time is logical.
Russia has nearly 460,000 confirmed coronavirus cases so far. Lockdown restrictions will remain in place in Moscow until at least June 14th.
Ivory Coast Rebizgra Forest Reserve is a protected area and an important front line in the global fight against climate change. Illegal cocoa plantations are a major cause of the massive deforestation that's taken place over the last 50 years. Further details in this report.
Decades of intensive cocoa farming have made the Ivory Coast the world's top chocolate producer, but it has also wiped out its tropical forests. Tasked with overseeing the protection of some 130,000 hectares of land, a forestry officer and a small team of 5 guards. A small river and a wooden bridge mark the forest reserve's boundary. A sign informs passers-by that hunting and clearing land is forbidden. Beyond this limit lies an illegal plantation. The aging stumps on the original forest is still visible among the stubby cocoa trees. A global environment protection campaign group, Mighty Earth, has shared graphics and satellite maps that have revealed the stark loss in Ivory Coast's forest since 1990.
Why have this map? The map introduces more responsibility in cocoa production in Ivory Coast, so that we may have cocoa that is fair, with producers who work responsibly and who can take responsibility and be accountable, not just with regards to Ivory Coast, but also the planters, the stakeholders, and for all Ivorian citizens. Because as you know, these environment and climate issues are global. They affect everyone.
The cocoa industry and government promised to develop a joint monitoring mechanism to end deforestation, but data shows progress has been very slow. Between 1960 and 2015, the country lost around 70% of its forest cover, much of it transformed into cocoa plantations.
We need to act. It's an emergency today. Because if we don't act quickly, we risk losing the entirety of our forests. Already 90% of our primary forests in Ivory Coast have been lost between 1960, when we gained independence, until 2000, so in the space of half a century. Today we talk of 2 million hectares of forests that remain, others say up to 3 million. But the most important thing is that we have lost an enormous amount of our forests. What must we do? We must wake up and stop deforestation. After that, we must make reparations. Everyone is affected. Unfortunately, our feeling is that not every effort is being made.
The country's new forestry policy is trying to reverse the loss. It is focusing on taking back control of government-managed parks and forest reserves. The government forestry policy has also planned European Union legislation, and stricter supply chain monitoring is coming together in an effort to reverse the damage.
There is speculation around the number. No number has been verified. It is said that 30% of production from Ivory Coast comes from illegal zones or protected zones. We don't have the numbers yet. We will make sure to get them, and more specifically, we want it to stop. That is our goal. We are conscious, ready and determined to ensure no coca comes from illegal zones.
The study group commends the government's reinforced policy to protect forests, but warned that without rigorous follow-ups, it will be difficult to save what is left. Although it commends the government's reinforced policy to protect forests, the environment group warns that without a rigorous follow-up, it will be difficult to save what is left.
A new rail cargo service has been launched between China and Europe. It will travel from Hefei, the capital city in East China's Anhui province, to Tilburg in the Netherlands. The train carrying 82 TEUs of cargo will travel around 15 days before arriving at the destination. The China-Europe freight train service now has 20 routes, linking Hefei with 8 countries. These include Germany, Poland, Finland, the Netherlands, and Russia. So far this year, a total of 194 China-Europe freight trains have departed from Hefei. Japan's economy contracted at an annualized of 2.2% in the first quarter of 2020, entering a technical recession. The revised figure was less than the 3.4% contraction in a preliminary estimate by the Cabinet Office showed. The revised data show that private consumption declined 0.8% from the previous quarter, compared with an initial estimate of a 0.7% fall. But capital investment rose by 1.9%, stronger than the initial estimate of a 0.5% decrease. The export-dependent economy contracted at an annual rate of over 7% in the last quarter of 2019. Japan's economy was affected by the fallout of COVID-19, but it was already stagnant in recent years due to a trade conflict between US and China. European stocks are trading mixed as markets weigh an economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic and ongoing global protest against racism. The choppy session is marking a divergence from the largely positive trends seen in Asia. Frankfurt's DAX is trading fractionally lower after German pharmaceutical supplier Saru stocks dropped by about 9%. London's FTSE 100 has gained a fraction, while CAC 40 in Paris is trading marginally lower. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the gains, closing nearly 1.5%, as shares of robot maker FANUC gained over 4%. Shanghai Composite and Seoul's Kospi also posted gains. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index remained flat. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained over 1%. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.